Susan's back. Atticus is back. James is back. Charles's wife, who I guess existed but wasn't there, but now she's here. We're going to do a deep dive into the first 200 pages of Anthony Horowitz's Marble Hall Murders, his third Susan Ryeland Atticus Pund novel. Can we hunt for the clues? This is a book club read-along edition. Let's solve Marble Hall Murders, the book. Our Let's Solve video series has been tackling television murder mysteries, only murders in the building, a murder at the end of the world, the after party, and we've covered the television adaptation of Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murders and its sequel, Moonflower Murders. Well, hold on to your seats, people. The third book in the Susan Ryeland Atticus Pund series is out, Marble Hall Murders. That's right, there's going to be a television adaptation of this book coming up in a certain point, but I thought, why wait for that? Let's do a book club. Let's see if we can read this and solve the murder mysteries in it. The one that's going to happen in the real world and the one that's going to happen in the novel within a novel. This is the British edition of the book. Look at it. Ooh, so fancy and shiny. I ordered it from Waterstones. It's an author signature edition of the book. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you how you can win this exact signed copy of Marble Hall Murders just by doing some simple steps. Now again, because this is the third book in the Susan Ryeland Atticus Pund series, we are probably going to have to spoil Magpie Murders and Moonflower Murders. So if you haven't read those books or watched the adaptation, skip away now. We don't want you to be spoiled, but otherwise, let's use our little gray cells and let's see if we can solve Marble Hall Murders. Now, okay. Literally, before even any of the text starts, we have this family tree. I'm going to put up a screenshot of this family tree, and let's see if you have the same thoughts that I did. First and foremost, this is the Crace family tree, and we see that it starts with Miriam Crace, who is married to Kenneth Rivers. But the children underneath Miriam Crace and Kenneth Rivers, none of them have the last name Rivers. Isn't that a bit odd that they took their mother's family name rather than their father's? Then another thing let's notice is that there's Frederick Turner, who is adopted. If you're familiar with a lot of Agatha Christie's work, adoption is like a beep, beep, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Meaning, is Frederick Turner actually the son of Miriam Crace? That's certainly one way this could go. Or what it'd be is that Jonathan Crace or Edward Crace had an illegitimate child and their mother took it on as her adopted son. Those are some things you want to think about just from looking at this family tree. And you only put a family tree before the text if it's important. All right, let's dive in. All right, let's go to the crime board. Let's solve these mysteries. Now, the first 25 pages of this book are setting up how in the world is there another Atticus Pund novel. We know author Alan Conway has died. But guess what? On the very first page, we find out something new about our lead protagonist, Susan Ryeland. She's in London. Wait a minute. Her boyfriend of the first two books, Andreas, he's back in Crete. Now this is again a spoiler for those first two books. At the end of the first book, Susan, what does she have to do? She has to choose, do I want to go with love? Do I want to be with Andreas? At the end of the first book, she chooses Andreas. At the end of the second book, hey, do I want to move back to Crete and be with Andreas? Guess what? She does move back with Andreas at the end of the second book. The first page of this third book, guess what? The romance is over. Susan and Andreas have broken up. This is impossible. There's no way these two can be broken up. They have to be together. So here's my first prediction on the first page. Somehow in the next 600 pages, Susan and Andreas are going to get back together. And for everybody who's watched our final video of Let's Solve Moonflower Murders based on that miniseries, you want to stock up on the Andreas Atticus theory. Okay, so the first page, Susan and Andreas, they're broken up. But we got more people. We got to get on the big board. The first guy we're going to put on the big board is Michael Flynn. Why is there another Atticus Pund novel? Well, Michael Flynn, this publisher, book publisher, he talked James into selling the rights to Atticus Pund and making more novels. Remember, James was Alan Conway's paramour, his lover, his significant other. And Alan left James the rights to all the Atticus Pund novels. So Michael Flynn's company, he came in and said, hey, sell us the right to make 3 more books. Now, there are a couple of oddities about this. If you remember the original book, Magpie Murders, the last book in the Atticus Pund series, Atticus had cancer. He was dying. Michael gets the right to create 3 more Atticus Pund novels, and the first one he's going to create is called Pund's Last Case. That doesn't make any sense. You want to write 3 more Atticus Pund novels, but you're continuing on with the character dying? He doesn't have Atticus apparently, beating his brain tumor and surviving. Michael Flynn, he's also reaching out to Susan. This is very suspicious. We've already had one publisher be the killer. Is Michael behind the killing here? Next suspect on the board, the author of these new Atticus Pund novels. It's a guy named Eliot Crace. Eliot with 1 L. Is there any names we can spell from Eliot with 1 L Crace? Eliot used to write books for Susan's old publisher, Cloverleaf Books. Eliot's books, they didn't really sell. They weren't successful. You're almost like, why in the world did this kid, other than his grandma was a famous author, get to write a book? Eliot didn't use Susan as an editor. Charles, who owned Cloverleaf Publishing, he handled Eliot personally. Now, my own thought is, why would Charles handle Eliot? Is this a secret paternity thing where Charles is Eliot's dad? And spoiler alert for Magpie Murders, in the real-life mystery, remember, Charles was the killer. It's said that Charles knew Eliot since he was a boy. Is that another hint that Charles is maybe Eliot's father? This is speculation crazy. We're not even 25 pages into the book. Let's keep going. We've already gone over the family tree, but remember, Eliot got to write this novel because of the success of his grandma. His grandma was a successful author, Miriam Crace. We talked about, isn't it odd that Miriam adopted this child? And we're like, is Miriam really the parent of this child they adopted? Well, get your little gray cells ready, everybody. First of all, Miriam Crace is a Catholic. Let's think about this. If you know a lot of Agatha Christie, you know Catholics had big problems with divorce in those post-war periods and with possibly illegitimate children. Illegitimate children, let's think of this. We find out in these first 25 pages that Miriam spent 6 months in Lausanne due to nervous breakdown. Ha ha ha, isn't that a perfect cover to cover the birth of an illegitimate child? What do you think? Now, Miriam's popular novels were about this little group, literally little 2-inch tall do-gooders. She wrote about the family all the time, and the littles, guess what? The little characters in her books adopted 2 children. Ding, ding, ding. The final Crace we're going to talk about in this first bit is Jonathan Crace. Jonathan Crace had a lot of dealings with Charles, that Cloverleaf publisher that Susan worked for in the very first book. So here are the characters. The only one we've met on the page is Michael Flynn. Again, it's suspicious, but I don't think Michael's going to be involved in anything evil other than greed trying to make these books happen. What do you guys think? What do you think of the first 25 pages? In these first 25 pages, we don't even really have a victim that the real-life murder, theoretically this book is going to have a real-life murder, could be based about. Now, I have read up to about page 100, and so if I had to guess, the victim in the real-life murder is going to be Grandma Miriam Crace. But we'll get to that into a second. Now we have to dive into Pund's Last Case, which is the name of this Atticus Pund novel. So let's go ahead and get our lead detective on the board. We have Atticus with his assistant James. Now you may be thinking, why is Atticus Pund even on the suspect board? Well, this is, I don't want to spoil Agatha Christie's curtain, but maybe I am saying it. If this is really Pund's last case, so we've got James, and Pund, let's just say we shouldn't assume that these two are completely innocent, if this is really the last case. Atticus is going to his doctor's visit. He's trying to beat this cancer, this tumor. There's no hope, but while there, he meets two characters. The first one is Lady Chalfont, Margaret Chalfont. Now, Lady Chalfont is there at the doctor's office. She's old. She had been widowed by her first husband. Let's watch that suspicious death. But she's been remarried. Now, Margaret Chalfont, let's think of the connections, and let's draw the connection on the board. She is probably a representation, we assume at this point, of Miriam Crace in real life. So we'll draw a line connecting these two characters. Again, Lady Chalfont is at the doctor. She's dying. She's there with her daughter. Her daughter's name is Judith Littleton. Now remember, Miriam Crace wrote books about these 2-inch tall figures, these little creatures called the Littles. And here, in the novel, Lady Chalfont's daughter, Judith Chalfont, married somebody and now has the last name Littleton. A couple other things to know about Judith. Judith, we're told, doesn't look anything like her mother. Was Judith adopted? Now, Lady Chalfont, she wants to talk to Pund. She's very nervous about something. But they don't talk at the doctor's office. Her daughter Judith drags her away, and she goes down to her villa in the south of France. But from there, we believe she writes a letter to Pund saying, hey, come visit us. I want to talk to you about something. The next bit of this 30,000 words of the continuation novel, it's really about introducing what feels like a dozen characters. It's not quite, but it's an awful lot. Also, Lady Chalfont, she is our victim. She's apparently poisoned in her tea, and she had a very specific tea and teapot that she drank from. Right now, there's this big hunt of, who could have access to the teapot? Honestly, I'm not paying attention to it. I think they're trying to pull our wool over our eyes, and I think she was poisoned earlier, to be honest. Now, she does seem to be poisoned. Somebody in disguise buys sleeping pills, a dangerous amount. It's a skinny person. I mentioned up top that Lady Chalfont, she's Catholic. She would have weird feelings about being divorced and or having any out-of-wedlock children. We find out Miriam Crace, she donated to St. Ambrose's orphanage. Then here in the fictionalized world, we find out that recurring character Detective Chubb is trying to collect for the police orphans fund. Orphans keep coming up. Who is the illegitimate child in the novel version? Now, I haven't really gone too deeply into any of these new characters that are introduced as we continue on. We've got Lady Chalfont's new husband, Elmer. Elmer's first wife, Marion, died possibly in suspicious circumstances. It's said she committed suicide. He's now Lady Chalfont's husband, but she still goes by Chalfont. She hasn't become Lady Waysmith, for example. Elmer had a son from that first marriage. The son is Robert. Robert is being followed. Somebody's taking photos of him. Robert kind of was a failure at a lot of things until he went into his dad's art gallery business. We've already talked about Judith, who is a doctor. I always call her Dr. Judith. And she's looking into those South American lines, the Nazca lines, which are the giant geoglyphs etched into the ground in the Nazca Desert in southern Peru. She's obsessed with this. All right, people who can do anagrams, let's spin around Nazca lines. Let's see if what we can spell from Nazca lines. We mentioned that Judith looked nothing like her mother, Lady Margaret. Is she the orphan? Judith is married to Harry, and Harry has sunk a lot of money into a hotel that won't be built. I gotta be honest, right now I'm not looking at Harry at all, nor really Elmer Waysmith and his son Robert. Not yet. Now, Lady Chalfont has a son, Geoffrey, and Geoffrey was friends with Judith's husband, Harry, before they were married. And he's got a wife who's an actress, Lola Chalfont. She's trying to get back into acting. She needs £2,000 to pay for the play that she's committed to producing. She also has a son. We need to pay attention to this son. Really, he hasn't come up much yet, but the son we got to focus on. Finally, there's Beatrice, the family maid. Beatrice made the tea, that if Lady Chalfont was poisoned via tea, the maid Beatrice made it. There's a local detective investigating. It's not just Pund and James. Voltaire is the French person on the scene. Voltaire has an eye patch and a scarred face. He's the French detective. Hopefully not a Clouseau. Okay, I've read up to page 204, in this book. The last chapter I've read is called Grandma, and that's as far as I'm going to cover in this video. There's a whole lot more suspects and clues I'm going to get to, but one of the odd things in this first 204 pages, you've read the first 30,000 words that Eliot Crace submitted that Susan is reading of this Atticus Pund novel. You read it and you wonder, is Eliot Crace a good writer? I mean, there are a lot of inconsistencies that are kind of like, huh? So I want to pay attention to a couple things. On page 51, let me read it to you. It's a paragraph that begins, Beatrice had a morning routine, lists all the things she does, and then near the end of this paragraph it reads, finally, she would make coffee for Lady Chalfont. 3 pages later, though, on page 54 of my version, it notes that Beatrice the maid came into Lady Chalfont's room carrying a tray with a steaming cup of ginger and lemon tea, as she did every day. So wait a minute, does she make coffee or does she make ginger and lemon tea? Similarly, on page 107, we note that Beatrice is speaking to James and Pund, and it's like Beatrice spoke no English. However, back on page 54, she did speak English to Lady Chalfont. One of the things that may be a contradiction or possibly a clue is that Lady Chalfont was speaking to her husband, Elmer Waysmith, and she says to him, I thought I might take tea in the gazebo. Would you join me? Now that's like in the morning before he leaves for the art gallery. Later, it's 4 in the afternoon, she's finally gone down to get tea in the gazebo. But did she take tea earlier, where she would have been poisoned earlier? The final inconsistency I want to talk about that Eliot Crace wrote was that in his novel, Atticus Pünd, The Last Case, Pünd is talking to Inspector Voltaire, and they're like, hey, do you want to go together to talk to the people at Lady Chalfont's mansion where she died to interview the suspects? And they say, no, let's split up. Pünd's like, you go, I'll meet you there, and then we'll go together. Then on page 148, it's like they arrived together at the Chalfont mansion. It doesn't make any sense. Eliot Crace, this is a first draft. I don't want to beat him up too much, but it's pretty crazy. It's pretty ridiculous. Now, when I get to who I think my suspect is, who killed Lady Chalfont, Margaret Chalfont, in the Atticus Pünd Last Case novel, I'm going to go over those clues in a bit, and my suspect in a bit. But honestly, one of the things I think is that, am I finding clues or just more proof that Eliot Crace can't write consistently? We'll get to that in a minute. The book hints that there's a clue in a mistranslation from French to English. Now, as somebody who took French in high school and French in college, je ne sais pas. I barely understand it. So, readers, are you following along? Have you caught a contradiction or a mistranslation of French which makes you think one thing, where if we actually correctly decode the French, it would point in a different direction? After Susan reads these 30,000 words, suddenly we're back in the real world, and suddenly we had a record scratch. There is a character in the book who doesn't make any sense being in the book. It's Charles. So if you remember Magpie murders, Charles was Susan's old boss. Suddenly, Charles's wife is becoming a major character in the book, Elaine Clover. And you're like, why is she here? Elaine claims she's always been close with this guy writing the new Atticus Pund book, Eliot Crace. So maybe Charles isn't the father of Eliot. Is it possible Elaine is the mother? We find out that her husband Charles worked hard on Grandma Miriam Crace's last 2 books about the Littles. Remember them? We find out Eliot's parents are in the art world, like in the novel, the Waysmiths are in the art world. Eliot's parents have moved to America, and the Waysmiths in the novel are Americans. Does this imply that Eliot's father, Edward Crace, is the basis for Elmer Waysmith, Lady Chalfont's new husband, second husband? We do meet Eliot's wife, Gillian Crace. I don't suspect Gillian at all, but she's got to go on the board. She could be a suspect. Now, Eliot implies in some ways that he's supposed to be like Cedric. But in a lot of ways, he's more like Robert Waysmith. Eliot tried a lot of stuff, failed. He was kind of a failure at a lot of things until he got into his grandmother's kind of business. And that really is more like Robert. Robert was kind of a mess up, a screw up, until he got involved in his father Elmer's business. After 200 pages, let me just say, I don't know who is going to die, who has died in the real world, probably Grandma Miriam Crace. But what's funny is if you ask me who the killer is, it's got to be Charles's wife Elaine. Why? I have no idea. Why do I think Elaine Clover is the killer of whatever murder is going to happen in the real world? Mainly because why is Elaine in this book if she's not the killer? It feels like Elaine Clover has to be the killer because she has no point in this novel. Maybe if you're a real literary person, you'd say Elaine represents all that Susan has lost. Like when Charles Clover turned out to be evil and ruined Susan's life, this is a way to bring up that pain. Susan's life has spiraled a bit out of control since Magpie murders, and maybe you're bringing in Elaine Clover to kind of be a representation or a reminder of all Susan has gone through. But I don't buy it. I don't buy it at all. 200 pages in, there is no murder that we have to pay attention to in the real world yet. I think Elaine Clover is going to be guilty. That's what I suspect. Okay, I've read 1/3 of this book, 204 pages of this book. And I've got to do my guesses. This is 1/3 of the way through. If you've read, hey, let's have some guesses. First thing right off the bat, let me be honest. I have no idea who killed Lady Chalfont, Margaret Chalfont. I have an idea, and I'm going to get to it in a bit, but when I read Magpie Murders, the novel within a novel mystery, I got it wrong. I didn't know. But I could tell who killed Alan Conway immediately, so I solved that immediately. For Moonflower Murders, I solved both of those immediately. Certainly the novel within the novel of Moonflower Murders, the death of the actress, it was so much like an Agatha Christie setup. I solved it. I knew it. I was good to go. For this, I read these 204 pages and I have no clue. But I think I may now know who did it. And I want to give you all the steps of how I got to this point. I may be completely wrong. We'll look in the third video. We're going to do 3 videos covering this book, and we'll see how right or wrong I was. But I'm going to tell you how I came to this suspect and what I think it was. And if you are reading along somehow with this, if you've read the first 200 pages, I'm going to give you the 2 things that I went back and reread that made me think, oh, wait a minute, it's this. So the first thing is, that Eliot Crace, when he's talking to Susan, he mentions the scene in the pharmacy. He's like, well, the pharmacist and the mystery person who comes in and gets those sleeping pills, he uses tu, the informal French version of the word you, as opposed to he doesn't use vous, which is the formal version of the French word you. And Eliot Crace said, oh, that's a big clue. So I went back to reread that section at the pharmacy. But what's interesting is I also hadn't had a lot of kind of notes about Voltaire. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make this video. I need to make more notes about Voltaire. So I reread the first scene Voltaire and French Inspector Voltaire was in, like back to back. I read the pharmacy scene and then I read the Voltaire scene. So you guys, if you're crazy and want to follow along, pause this video, go read those 2 scenes, and then tell me if you have the same thoughts I did. Have you read those 2 scenes? All right, now let's get back to it. And this is possible spoilers. I may have solved it. I have no motive. I'm missing a lot of pieces, but here's what I'll talk you through. So if you read the introduction of Inspector Voltaire, it says Voltaire is in his 30s or his 40s. It was hard to be sure. And reading that, it felt real familiar because in the mystery person in the pharmacy, they're described as, it would have been difficult to tell his age from his appearance. And you're like, huh. So both Voltaire and the mystery person at the pharmacy, it's difficult to guess their age. Then listen to this sentence. Voltaire was dressed in a dark crumpled suit that did not fit him well. Now, if you read that, you think nothing of it. But you think back to the scene in the pharmacy, the person in the pharmacy, it was said, the man was wearing a crumpled blue suit. It was a little too big for him. So here we go. Crumpled is used in both sentences. Didn't fit him well about Voltaire, the person in the pharmacy. It was a little too big for him. So it's like they're being described the exact same way. And this could be that Eliot Crace is just a terrible writer and uses the same adjectives and descriptions for both characters. But it made me think, is this a blatant clue that Voltaire is the person who went and got those sleeping pills at the pharmacy? So then I noticed, wait a minute, Voltaire's first name is Frederick. And I flipped to the front of the book, and I saw that the adopted Crace sibling was Frederick Turner, Fred Turner. And so you're like, oh, they're obviously supposed to be based on each other. Wait a minute, was Voltaire adopted? Is he Lady Chalfont's adopted son? And you're like, wait, what's going on? So then really pay attention to Voltaire. So Voltaire, this is another thing, because I was focused on his introduction. I was like, wait a minute, all this rings a bell. Voltaire says that he came down from Paris on the overnight train. You think, okay, that's no big deal. But we know an awful lot about that overnight trail. Earlier in the novel, you find out that if you took the blue train from Paris overnight, it leaves at 8 o'clock in the evening, and then it arrives in Marseille in the early morning, and then kind of takes till afternoon to get to the city where the Chalfont mansion is, right? And so how in the world did Voltaire come down from France and get there in time? He is talking to Pund literally the next day of, Lady Chalfont died, and then he and Pund are talking the next day. Well, you think, well, okay, Voltaire could have left at 8 p.m. the night that Lady Chalfont died, and then gotten down there and talked to Pund. But Voltaire has already interviewed all the members at the mansion. How is that possible if he left at 8 o'clock, arrived in town around 1 p.m.? There's no way he could have then gone to the mansion, interviewed all the Chalfonts, and then picked up Pund to re-interview them. There's also the bit of oddity of how in the world did Voltaire know that Pund was involved? Once again, if he took the train down from Paris, he could have only been there a couple of, at the most an hour or two by the time he meets Pund in the hotel. How did he know Pund was involved? Neither Lady Chalfont's son Geoffrey nor Harry Littleton knew about Pund being around, being involved. So the only way he could have known is maybe Judith? Is Voltaire an adopted son of Lady Chalfont, and did he poison her for some reason that we're going to find out? He's my guess. That's crazy. Listeners, let me know down in the comments what you thought. No spoilers. I've still got 400 pages to read before I get to the end of this mystery. But Voltaire, the cop, did it. Certainly Agatha Christie had a handful of cops be murderers. That is my best guess. Now, I mentioned, hey, I'm going to be giving away this signed copy of Anthony Horowitz's Marble Hall Murders. How can you be eligible to win? Just go down in the comments, leave a comment. I'm going to wait till a month after my third video I'm doing on Marble Hall Murder. Everybody who's left a comment will be entered for a chance to win, and I'll draw a name and then message you on YouTube to say, hey, you've won. What do you guys think? Who do you suspect? Let's solve Marble Hall Murders.